Chairman, I want to take a brief call to respond to some of the points just made by the member who's resumed her seat. She asked the question, was there some dastardly plan afoot to align the personal and corporate rates at 28 cents at some point in the future? I want to disillusion her, Mr Speaker, by saying, Mr Chairman, that there are no present plans to move in that direction. The government's long-term or medium-term intention does remain the alignment of rates, but frankly that will occur as fiscal circumstances permit, and if one looks at the budget tables and the budget figures, there's not going to be a rapid path in the direction that she fears might happen, that others would welcome to happen. Now let me come to the real point that lies behind that. As the Tax Working Group disclosed, the big issue was the discrepancy between the top personal rate and the trust rate, because over the last decade, since the Labor Party in 1999 hiked that top rate, we have seen a massive explosion in the use of trusts. I acknowledge they campaigned on it, but it was the most stupid, inept tax decision made in the last decade, because what it has done is create a massive explosion in the use of trusts, not for property protection reasons, but for income sheltering reasons, that cost the revenue, cost the taxpayers of New Zealand around $300 million a year in revenue foregone. That over the period of the decade is about $2.7 billion. And Mr Chairman, if she wants to talk about having a tax-free threshold, which is extremely expensive, she should just bear in mind the comparison that she would have been able to achieve that had in fact we not had that leakage over the last decade. So, Mr Chairman, I think that the point that needs to be made is that by aligning the rates as is set out in this bill of the trusts and the top personal rate, we will actually secure revenue for the future that can be used to give funding to some of the dreams that members might have. I want to talk about the in-work tax credit, because I have been in the unusual position of being part of the previous government when the Working for Families scheme was being developed. And one of the things that was critical there, and members opposite quite rightly campaigned on, was that they wanted to have a difference between the level of support provided to people who were in work and those who were not, hence the title, the in-work payment. Now, Mr Chairman, if you were to extend the in-work payment to those who were not in work, you actually defeat the whole purpose of what Working for Families was about. The title was deliberately chosen. It was about families who were in work, who were struggling to make ends meet, giving them a boost. Extending it across the field simply broadens the welfare net, and I give credit to the previous government for not actually including that in the original thinking, and I think that detracts from the member's argument. Mr Chairman, the other thing I want to say was the hoary old chestnut of the capital gains tax was wheeled out by the Greens as part of their Mind the Gap package. I thought that was a railway term from the United Kingdom. Never mind. The reality is that a capital gains tax in New Zealand would add hugely to compliance costs, it would not be fair, and it would not raise the revenue that is alluded to be attached to it. Over a long period of time it might, but it is a simplistic argument to say, let's have a comprehensive capital gains tax, exempt the family home, and all the revenue that will flow will allow nirvana to be created in this nation. It simply does not work that way. And I'm delighted that we've rejected the notion of a capital gains tax. I think it's time to bury the idea once and for all, because it's been floated over the last 20 years. No government has ever picked it up, because whenever they've looked at the reality of what it would actually mean, they've worked out it's worth far less than the trouble, the disruption and the chaos it would create. Far better to move to an alignment of rates, far better to see a smoothing out of some of the discrepancies that are there at the moment, far better to deal with some of the abuses that we'll talk about in later parts of this bill that are distorting investment patterns, that are creating biases in the economy, than to impose what would be the ultimate of envy taxes. And that's where that policy becomes a complete failure and a nonsense. Sir, can I just say as I conclude, I acknowledge this debate may have a little bit longer to run. I think it's been a good, constructive debate today, and I would congratulate all of the members who participated. I disagree profoundly with many of the things that have been said, but I actually think there's been a good airing of the issues, and let's hope we can continue in this spirit.
Call Malone.